Stell dir vor, du liegst auf dem Rücken. Stell dir vor, du hast die letzten Jahre trainiert. Trainiert. Jeden Tag hast du trainiert für diesen Moment. Du liegst jetzt da, schaust nach oben, spürst die Schwerkraft und dann hörst du den Countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Und dann heißt es Lift-off. Denn dann wird die Rakete nach oben geschossen und du befindest dich in dieser Rakete und wirst einfach mal von der Erde nach oben ins Weltall geschossen. Was für mich absolut unfassbar ist. Also wirklich, ich finde Fliegen schon nicht so cool. Ich würde mich niemals in eine Rakete setzen. Ich würde niemals mich da hochschießen lassen. Auch wenn den Blick, den man da oben haben muss, wahnsinnig krass sein muss und wahrscheinlich auch was ganz Besonderes ist. Nur eins weiß ich sicher, ich werde nie ins Weltall fliegen. Klar, sag niemals nie, aber bevor das vielleicht eines Tages bei mir ganz utopisch hätte stattfinden können, dachte ich mir, hey, ich frage jemanden, der da oben war. Und zwar nicht nur einmal, sondern mehrfach und der vor allem auch mehrfach einen Spacewalk gemacht hat. Also wirklich aus der Kapsel raus ist und dann draußen gearbeitet hat, damals das Hubble Telescope repariert hat und Zeit außerhalb, das ist so verrückt, einfach nur in seinem Space-Anzug verbracht hat. Ich kann mir das beim besten Willen nur so schwer vorstellen, wie das sein muss. Und vor allem erzählt Claude Nicollier nicht nur von der Vorbereitung, warum es damals dann verschoben wurde, warum er erst 1992 ins Weltall geschossen wurde, um es mal krass zu sagen, und wie sich das eigentlich für den Körper anfühlt. Und ob er Stress gespürt hat oder was er viel mehr gespürt hat als Stress. Und wie gehen eigentlich Astronauten miteinander um? Haben die sich lieb oder gehen die sich auf den Keks? Man ist die ganze Zeit auf der ISS und denkt sich, boah, irgendwie nervt mich die Person oder ich würde mal gerne eine Runde um den Block drehen. Ja, aber das geht nicht. Wie gehe ich also damit um, wenn es zwischenmenschlich Konflikte gibt? Wie entstehen die? Entstehen die überhaupt auf so einer Insel, auf so einer Kapsel im Weltall oder nicht? All das und wie er damit umgegangen ist, was seine gefährlichste, ich sag mal, seine Notfallsituation war und das auch noch einen Tag vor Weihnachten, wo es echt kritisch wurde und er auf die Hilfe vom Boden, also vom Boden der Erde angewiesen war und wie er das überlebt hat. All das erzählt er heute im Podcast und ich bin wahnsinnig stolz und froh, dass ich heute mit euch das Interview veröffentlichen darf und mit euch das Gespräch teilen darf mit Claude Nicollier, der als erster Schweizer Astronaut im Weltall war und dich mitnimmt auf eine Reise, wie das ist dort oben, wie lange bereitet man sich vor, wie wird man mental darauf vorbereitet, wie körperlich, wie geht man mit den anderen Menschen um und welche Werte sind ihm wahnsinnig wichtig und welche Gedanken hatte er, als er das erste Mal auf die Erde runtergeblickt hat. Also, ich wünsche dir wahnsinnig viel Spaß. Ich bin wirklich froh über alle meine Gäste. Ich spreche mit allen gern. Doch ich muss gestehen, einen Astronauten im Podcast habe ich noch nie woanders gehört. Und deswegen freut es mich heute extra groß, dass ich das mit dir teilen darf. Viel Spaß. Kopfsache, dein Podcast rund um mentale Gesundheit, wo du lernst, erfolgreich mit Stress umzugehen. So first of all, Claude, thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast show, Today's an English episode. And we're gonna talk about how stress feels up in space. So please share us a little bit. What is your story? And yeah, who are you?
Well, my name is Claude Nicollier. I'm a Swiss citizen. And I was originally an astrophysicist. I studied physics in Lausanne, astrophysics in Geneva. I was also a part-time pilot in the Air Force, and this was in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s. And then there was an opportunity to become an astronaut for Europeans. That was the first opportunity. Started in the mid-70s, and the European Space Agency selected the first group, 3 people, and eventually, after about 1 year-long evaluation, physically, mentally, and knowledge and ability to work under pressure. I don't talk about stress, but pressure, but we'll talk about the difference afterwards. There was a selection of Ulf Merbold from Germany and Wupo Ockels from the Netherlands and myself as the first 3 European Space Agency astronauts. That was in the middle of 1978. We were sent to Houston to train on the space shuttle because there was an agreement between the European Space Agency and NASA to train these first 3 European astronauts on the space shuttle. The idea was to involve us on a space shuttle mission that were carrying European payloads. So we were serving the European nations of ESA. Trained a long time. In fact, I trained for 12 years before my first mission, which was in 1992. And the reason is not that I had a hard time understanding all of that, but there were circumstances, in fact, sad circumstances. The Challenger accident delayed my flight by about 6 years. It was in 1986. I had a mission planned for end of 1986, and on the 26th of January 1986, we had a Challenger accident, and all the missions were pushed back a lot. And as I can only fly on missions carrying European payload, there were not too many, and mine was pushed to 1992. It was fine. I mean, it was a very exciting time. I mean, to train as an astronaut, I knew I was going to fly. It was a little bit delayed. Then I flew in 92. Then I had 3 more missions in the 90s, 92, the first one, 93, 96, and 99. And wonderful, I had the opportunity to go to the Hubble Space Telescope on 2 occasions and do repair work with tools and equipment to do work on a complex scientific instrument in the space environment. And that was wonderful because I had been an astrophysicist, I became an astronaut, and I asked to go to Hubble. That was such a dream. That was really wonderful. And I stayed until 2005. Then I left. Well, I went to Germany for a while, for about 1 year, serving the European Space Agency with the ESA Astronaut Center was in Cologne, Germany. And I helped them there for a while after all the experience I had gathered in the United States and in space. Then I left ESA in 2007, and then I accepted a position as a professor at EPFL, École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne. It's a Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. There is one in Zurich, ETH, Eidgenössische Technische Hochschule, and one in Lausanne, EPFL. And I teach since I left ESA, which means since 15 years I teach at EPFL. That's a summary of my life activity, which was wonderful. I feel extraordinarily privileged to have been able to do that. A privilege.
I mean, it sounds amazing. And the closest I've come to space or anything like that was visit the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral. That was like my how should I say, the closest I get there. But I mean, can you share us a little bit? Because I cannot imagine you sit there in a rocket. I mean, you look up to the sky, right? So you're kind of laying, and then there's the countdown, and then it's 3, 2, 1, and then it starts. And I mean, what is that
then
kind
you
of
go,
feeling?
And it shakes a lot.
And then there is no return.
Well, I would say that the feeling you have, of course, you train a lot. First, there was a basic training and the advanced training on the shuttle, which was a very complex vehicle, by the way, because it was a space vehicle that was going up to space. Then it was doing in-orbit operation for typically about a week or 10 days or 15 days maximum. Then there was the deorbiting, re-entering the atmosphere, approach and landing. So it's a vehicle, space vehicle that did everything. When you look at the International Space Station, it's always in space. Then you go to it with a capsule. Then the capsule is docked to ISS. And at the end of the stay in the station, you come back in the same capsule. But the shuttle was doing everything in one vehicle, so it was very complex. So the training was pretty long on the space shuttle. And then at some point, once you had understood how the shuttle operates, you were kind of waiting for an assignment for a given mission. And there were always 7 people who were assigned to a mission. There was a commander, the pilot, and 5 so-called mission specialists. And I was going to be one of the mission specialists. The commander and pilot were always American on the space shuttle. Okay. Then at some point, you are selected for a given mission, typically about a year to a year and a half before. Then you train specifically on the mission. And a year is pretty long, with long weeks and sometimes weekends work. So after this year of training on the mission, you understand the mission quite well, and you are ready. You know the vehicle, the space shuttle itself. We trained a lot on Hubble Space Telescope whenever we were going to go and visit Hubble, because you need to understand what you're going to be working on. If you work with tools on Hubble, you need, of course, to do a lot of training on the ground in simulators, whether it's simulators on computers or simulator in the water to simulate the space environment, the weightlessness for spacewalking. So you train so much that when you go up, because I come back to the question you had, how do you feel when you go, you are well prepared to do your job. So you are not really concerned about the capability to do what you have been training for a long time to do. Of course, you're somewhat concerned about the risk of the ascent to space. That was the most dangerous part of the mission, the 8.5 minutes only, relatively short time from liftoff until you are on orbit. Space is very close. You get there in about in less
It's not
than
even
9
10
minutes.
minutes.
And then you are there, and then there is main engine cut off, and then you are in weightlessness, and you are on orbit around the Earth. And then you do your job according to what you train to do. The main thing is training, being prepared. And that reduces a lot your stress level. To come back to the stress, there's always pressure to do the things right. So it's not something that you are not completely relaxed. No, pressure to do the right thing. But I would say that you try to put stress and for sure fear on the side because you are so well trained.
Okay, but have you ever had
I
the
don't hear
feeling
you
of
anymore.
fear? I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Okay, I hear you now.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. You said that you are so well trained that you are able to leave fear behind or at least put it aside. Was there any situation, any time you were like, okay, that feels like fear. I know I'm trained and I'm gonna handle this. I gotta handle this, but still it's, yeah, a little bit of fear coming up?
No, I would say I never, ever had fear.
Wow.
I have to say, and you put the fear on the side because it never helps to have fear, to be afraid, to be scared. It never helps. It's so much better to put it aside. You are sometimes somewhat concerned. Typically, I mentioned the ascent to space, which is, from a safety point of view, pretty critical. You have an enormous amount of thrust, enormous amount of liquid propellant being gulped, swallowed by the three main engines, transform this into a fire that is ejected through the nozzles and give you the thrust to go up there. So it's inherently dangerous because it's such an enormous amount of power and thrust. So obviously there's a danger associated with that. But you really put the fear and the scare on the side, and you always try to be mentally prepared to do the right thing in case things go bad. The ascent to orbit, again, about 8.5 minutes, starting with a lot of shaking, but not too many G's or too much acceleration at the beginning because you are so massive, so heavy.
Okay.
And what determines the acceleration or the rate of change of the velocity is really the thrust to weight ratio. And the thrust has a certain value, but the weight is enormous at the beginning. So you don't have a lot of acceleration initially because you are so massive, so much weight. We had most of the acceleration was at the end of the ascent where we had about 3G. But at the beginning of the ascent, we had only a G1/2. So we were weighing a little more than we normally do on Earth. We were shaking a lot, but the acceleration was not that large because the mass was so large. And in fact, the weight of the space shuttle at liftoff was about 2,000 tons, and 80% of that was propellant. And when you get to orbits, you have hardly any more propellant. We had about 1% of propellant remaining, reaching orbit. So you are so much less massive that the acceleration was larger. And we understood all these things. We have been trained to understand all of that. The main thing is not to have too many uncertainties. You want to understand what's going on. In this case, the stress level is going down. It's like on orbit operation, when you go spacewalking, you trained it so much, including facing problems that were simulated during the training, whether it was again a computer simulation or in the water pool. And you have trust that you can do it even if you encounter problems. You know that you may encounter problems that were really not at all foreseen. So you may have to be inventive to find a way to still reach the goal despite the problems. But you always have the ground helping you if needed.
Okay, so it's kind of, you always can check with somebody, and at least, I mean, they're far away, but at least they can help in
Yes,
any
and
way?
we have the boss of the mission is a flight director in the flight control room. It's not the commander on board. Of course, if something happens during the mission that requires immediate attention or reaction, like, I don't know, a spacewalker suddenly floating away because he or she did not attach his or her safety
Please
tether.
tell me this never happened.
It never happened, no, because we are really careful to always hold the structure, and if we at some point don't hold it anymore, the safety tether allows us to come back to the spaceship. But anyway, if something like this happened, the commander will make the decision, of course, to move the space shuttle to recover the free-floating astronauts. But everything that relates to the overall conduct of the mission, if we add one day, if we add one spacewalk or delete one for a reason or another, these decisions are made on the ground by the flight director, who is always extremely talented, good leadership, usually respected by the crew. So you had really the command from the ground, and the flight director was surrounded by a number of flight controllers. Each of them had his or her own area of knowledge.
Okay.
The navigation, the propulsion, the spacewalk. There were some spacewalk experts. We had a medical doctor who was monitoring us from a medical point of view and psychological point of view. So we have a lot of support from the ground. Although, as I mentioned, as we were well trained, if things were more or less nominal, we could do it without the ground support. But as soon as we had problems that were a little bit beyond what we could reasonably solve ourselves on board the spaceship, then we had help from the ground. We did not even need to ask for help. They were helping spontaneously. So it's a big team. It's a big team with two features, important features: trust and respect. And both are always at a very high level. You respect your colleagues, whether the people on the ground who support you, and they respect you, and within the crew itself, there's total respect and trust. These two features.
When you talk about trust, I need to, I am not that big fan of flying. So it means, I love to see distant places and visit my sister in Australia and all that stuff. So I need to get on a plane, but I never enjoy it. And now when you say trust, I mean, you need to trust in so much more, not only a plane and pilots, but really like the whole system and the shuttle and the engineers and the doctors and everyone who helps you. What was for you, even though you say you're well trained, so you never had any fear or there was not kind of a big emergency, but what was the most kind of emergency case that you had when you were up there?
Well, during a spacewalk that I did on the 23rd of December 1999, that was my last mission.
It was kind of your Christmas gift.
And I was spacewalking with my colleague Mike Fole, an American astronaut, and it was my first spacewalk. And for him, it was his fourth spacewalk, so he had quite a lot of experience in spacewalking. But anyway, I was trying to insert in the telescope a new fine guidance sensor, which is kind of a camera that allows a precise pointing of the telescope to take pictures of celestial targets. And during the time, it was a pretty massive object, about 200 kilograms of weight on the surface of the Earth. Of course, when you're in space, it doesn't have any more weight. It just has mass. And when you want to move it rapidly, you cannot do it because there's inertia. There's a difference between mass and weight. But anyway, it was a pretty big thing and pretty massive. And then I had an alert. Your spacesuit is like your personal spaceship. And whenever something goes wrong, it gives you an alert, like in an airplane. If you have a hydraulic failure, you have an alert, and the pilots react in the proper way to solve the problem and still ensures safety of the airplane and the passengers in the back. But I had the alert, it made doo-doo, 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 acoustic alert, and then I could see on the little window that I had a high partial pressure of carbon dioxide. I mean, inside the suit, we had pure oxygen, and the oxygen was circulated, and it was going through cartridges that were eliminating the carbon dioxide, because you inhale the oxygen and you exhale oxygen partly, but also carbon dioxide by definition. And you need to have that carbon dioxide eliminated, because if you don't eliminate it, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide will increase with time, and at some point it becomes unbearable from a physical point of view. And I had suddenly an alert that there was a too high partial pressure of carbon dioxide, which was a bad news.
When you were spacewalking
When I was
there.
in space, and I was spacewalking. I was on a small platform at the end of the robotic arm that was operated by a crew member in the cabin of the shuttle. And well, of course, when something like this happened, everything stops because it's kind of an emergency, potential emergency. And in case that had been, in fact, it happened that it was not a real one. It was a sensor failure. But when you hear the alarm, you don't know. And if it had been a real high partial pressure carbon dioxide, I would have had to open a little valve on the side of my helmet to take out the oxygen and the carbon dioxide. But of course, it uses the oxygen supply, which was in the backpack, in the life support system in my back. It uses it very rapidly. So you have about 10 minutes to go back to the airlock and repressurize the airlock and save yourself. Because, too high partial pressure carbon dioxide is dangerous. At some point, you can even suffer a lot from it or die, So you have relatively little time to go back to the airlock. And I knew what symptoms you have physically when you have too high a partial pressure of carbon dioxide. And you can do that maybe tonight. You breathe in a plastic bag. And of course, you inhale the content of the plastic bag. And when you exhale carbon dioxide and a little bit of oxygen. So the partial pressure of carbon dioxide will increase.
Yeah.
And after a few minutes, when you do this, you have strange symptoms. And we knew these symptoms on purpose. We had trained on the ground to know these symptoms. I had none of these symptoms. I said, I feel fine. I don't have these symptoms. And they did their analysis because they get a lot of data with telemetry on the ground. And the ground controllers at some point said, well, Claude, it's a sensor failure. So you're okay. You can continue.
But you were staying outside and there was still the alarm, but you were like, no, I'm fine. I know my body. I know the symptoms.
Yeah, with a threat of having to go back to the airlock pretty rapidly. So that was I would say that was nearly stress, but it was certainly pressure, but it was nearly stress. But I recovered from that. And after 2 minutes, I had this good news that it was not a real problem of too high carbon dioxide pressure in the suit. And again, the fact that I was feeling fine was for me a good indication that it was probably a sensor failure, which was confirmed a few minutes later. So that was a special moment in my during the spacewalk for sure, which lasted about 8 hours, but in my life as an astronaut, because it could potentially have been something pretty hazardous, no doubt about that. So that was a special moment in my life as an astronaut. But again, I remained pretty calm because I was feeling fine. And again, it's a question of training, being prepared. I knew my symptoms. If I had not known them, I would have been much more
and you trusted it.
Worried, but I knew my symptoms. I knew the symptoms of too high partial pressure carbon dioxide. I did not have any of these. So it was pretty reasonable to assume it was sensor failure. It was confirmed by the ground shortly afterwards.
I can definitely learn a lot from you when you say that was almost kind of stress. I'm like, wow, okay, this certainly had freaked me out.
But I would say that the key word is training and preparation.
Yeah.
And to a certain degree, it's the same in aviation. If you have very experienced pilots, even though they may have engine failures or hydraulic failures or navigation problem or really bad weather or turbulence, if they have been training a lot to work in such abnormal conditions, they remain calm even if you have problems, including engine failure. Of course, if you have an engine failure on a single engine airplane, it's bad because the airplane is coming down. But if you're on an airliner which has at least 2 engines, most of them have 2 engines, you can fly on 1 engine only. You have to remain calm. It's okay. 1 engine out is something that pilots train a lot to do approaches and landing, including with crosswind and other bad conditions. With 1 engine is okay. If you train a lot, you remain calm. And the other crew members and the passengers behind, they remain reasonably calm also because they know they have an experienced pilot who will handle the situation properly.
The next time I'm flying through turbulences, I will think of that. And I mean, I'm never screaming or so far, but still, innerly I feel really shaky. But you said, and that was very interesting at the beginning, that stress and pressure is not the same, and you didn't feel stress, but you felt that pressure.
Yes.
Can you guide
Yeah.
us through what do you mean by the difference between stress and pressure, and how did pressure feel?
Well, for me, the pressure was doing something, and I'm talking again about the spacewalk, which was, of course, a special time as an because you are much more exposed to the hazards of spaceflight when you're spacewalking. And for me, the pressure
Sorry, just a
was.
question. Sorry to interrupt. How long does it take to get outside the capsule to get into space?
You go via an airlock. In Germany, it's Schleuse. So it's a compartment of the spaceship that can be either under pressure, the normal pressure we have in the cabin of the space shuttle, or if you close the inner door and you come in your suit and you verify your suit is working properly, then you can evacuate the air inside the airlock. And at some point, when you have vacuum in the airlock, you can open the outer door and you can come out. So it's a pretty long operation because you need to do this change of pressure rather slowly, because if you don't do that, you have problem with your ears, because the difference of pressure between the outside of the ear and the inside and the inner ear. Anyway, it took, I would say, from the time we were starting to suit up in our spacesuit until we were coming out was about 2 hours, I would say, roughly 2 hours. Yeah. But again, we do things slowly and with always a conscience of what we are doing, and we try to never hurry up and do things under time pressure. We try to avoid that. But once you are out, of course, you're on your own. You need to be very focused. You really want to avoid making mistakes, and that was pressure. When you're in an environment where there's very little tolerance for mistakes, I would say it's a pressure on yourself, but not stress, because again, I was prepared to the point that I did not feel stress. Stress is the next step beyond pressure, where you have so much pressure that you start doing the wrong things because you are nervous. Stress is being under pressure, and in addition, being nervous to the point that you don't have your full capability to do the right thing.
Okay.
So I felt pressure during the whole spacewalk, during the 8 hours. I would say, of course, a little more when I had the problem that I talked about before. But there were other small glitches where I was feeling under quite a lot of pressure, but I would never say that I was under stress. No fear, as I mentioned before, you put this aside, but we try also to avoid the stress situation. Pressure you can take. Yeah.
How did you handle that pressure situation, or the pressure? Was it just like you accepted it and were like, yes, it's the way it is, but I'm fine because I'm trained?
It's the way it is. I was fine. And in fact, we already had the pressure when we were training in the pool, because we had a lot of people monitoring what we were doing, and sometimes they were injecting some simulated problems on us, because we need to train not only the nominal mission, but the mission with some obstacles or problems that we have to go around, so that we still accomplish the mission objective. When I say the mission for spacewalk, it's 8 hours outside where you have to reach a certain objective. We had to change the main computer of Hubble and install that fine guidance sensor that I was talking about before. This big thing, really massive.
Yeah.
But you can handle that, because on one hand, you want to be successful. The whole crew was nearly obsessed with reaching success on the mission. And for each spacewalk, you have a certain goal for the spacewalk, and you want to be successful. We had planned about 7 hours of work outside, and finally we were a little more than 8 hours, because we had problem inserting that fine guidance sensor. We had much more friction in the telescope than we had expected. So we had to change the strategy of doing the insertion of the telescope. When I say we, it's my colleague Mike Fon and myself. So we work on both sides of the camera and pushing it centimeter by centimeter in order to avoid any yaw deviation. And finally, with this other technique that was discussed with the ground team, we could do it successfully, but we lost a lot of time. That's why the spacewalk was quite long, beyond 8 hours, with a little bag of water that we had inside the spacesuit, about 1.5 liters of water.
Okay.
which was in fact not enough. I remember being quite dehydrated at the end of the spacewalk. And that was adding a little bit of pressure because you don't feel physically 100%, but it was toward the end of the spacewalk, so I didn't worry too much. Again, all pressure, no stress, and the fear completely on the side.
I love that. It's really amazing. And you also said you were well trained physically, but you also were trained mentally. And how does a mental training for a space mission look like?
Well, we don't do any specific mental training, but we spend a lot of time in the simulator where we are the whole crew. So whenever one of the crew members has to do something and has a problem, you learn to help each other. I mean, that's so obvious.
Okay.
But it was really a crew activity with, of course, some crew members that had a very special activity. Typically, when we were doing spacewalk, it was 2 out of the 7 being out. So they had a special, there was an emphasis on their work outside, which was a little more under more pressure, I would say, than the one who stayed inside. But again, the mental approach to these activities, whether they are inside the cabin or outside, and the mental health is maintained by the fact that you know what to do, you know how to do it because you trained a lot for it. So there was no specific mental training, but all of the training in the simulator to do the various parts of the mission, whether it was the ascent, the on-orbit phase, including the spacewalks, and the re-entry in the atmosphere, approach and landing. We had trained all these phases, most of the time, all of us together, and sometimes the groups of 2, typically the 2 who trained for spacewalk, they train normally just the 2 of them. The commander was not there, and the other mission specialists also were not there. But we did not need any specific mental training. The mental training was part of the preparation for the mission.
Okay. And you're up in space, and what kind of feelings come up when you just look down on Earth? I cannot imagine it. Of course, we all know it from the movies, but if you're really there, what do you feel? Zeit für eine kurze Unterbrechung. Wenn du dir denkst, ja, das klingt gut und ach, ich würde auch so gern so gut mit Stress umgehen können, aber ganz ehrlich, ich weiß manchmal einfach nicht, wo mir der Kopf steht. Wenn du dem Stress Lebewohl sagen möchtest und endlich lernen möchtest, wie du ohne innere Unruhe, ohne Hektik, ohne dieses Zerrissensein durch den Alltag kommst und auch wenn du viel zu tun hast, alles gelassen und entspannt, aber produktiv durchziehen kannst, dann hol dir auf jeden Fall mein Buch. Mein Buch siehst du alles hier unten in den Shownotes. Du bekommst es auf Amazon, in den Buchhandlungen, bei den Online-Buchhandlungen, kurzum, überall, wo es Bücher geht. Und erst vor kurzem habe ich eine tolle, richtig nette Rezension bekommen. Und zwar von einem ITler, der normalerweise in die Richtung gar nichts liest. Doch er sagt, hey, ich habe übrigens dein Buch gelesen und finde es wirklich richtig gut. Vor allem, dass du es extra kurz und auf den Punkt gehalten hast. Viele solche Bücher haben ja oft 400 und mehr Seiten, nur um dicker auszusehen und oft nur Inhalt für 50 Seiten und der Rest ist dann Füller. Ich finde es klasse, dass du deinen Weg gehst und es so kurz gehalten hast. Und genau darum geht's. Wer gestresst ist, ganz ehrlich, der liest doch keine 300, 400, 500 Seiten. Nein, du willst Hilfe auf den Punkt. Und nur weil es heißt vom Burnout zurück ins Leben, ist das Buch für jeden und jede, die eben nicht in den Burnout rutschen will, sondern schon davor die Notbremse ziehen möchte und einen Alltag ohne Stress haben möchte. So, wie gesagt, du kriegst es überall, Amazon, Buchhandlungen, Online-Buchhandlungen. Hol dir das Buch, es wird deinen Alltag verändern, es wird dich entspannter machen und du wirst trotzdem wahnsinnig viel erreichen und alles, was du dir vornimmst, entspannt schaffen. Viel Spaß beim Lesen und jetzt geht's auch schon weiter. What kind of feelings come up when you just look down on Earth? I cannot imagine it. Of course, we all know it from the movies, but if you're really there, what do you feel?
There are 2 things. On one hand, the beautiful view of the Earth and the weightlessness. And these are the 2 very special conditions when you work in a spaceship on orbit around the Earth versus working in a laboratory or working on your desk. And the views of the Earth are really spectacular. You know, you go around the Earth in an hour and a half. So you move very fast. So you go 16 times around the Earth in one terrestrial day of 24 hours. So for me, I had the feeling the Earth is on one hand beautiful. I mean, the views of the Earth touch me enormously because of the beauty. The beauty, that's one thing. It's a small planet because you go around it in an hour and a half. I know you go fast, but still, you don't go extraordinarily fast compared to the velocities of celestial objects. You know, the Earth moves around the sun with 30 kilometers per second. We had only 8 kilometers per second, so we were moving much slower than the Earth around the sun. So you go pretty fast, but not that fast, and you go around the Earth in an hour and a half. And I always had the feeling this is such a small planet. It's a beautiful planet. It's small. It's very isolated, you know, because the other celestial bodies are pretty far. You have the moon. Yeah, the moon is relatively close, but it's not an enormous and very striking celestial body. It's a beautiful little object in the sky. Then the sun is pretty far away. It's 150 million kilometers. So you have the feeling the Earth is very isolated. And I was thinking, wow, if we have real problems on Earth, we are on our own. Nobody will help us because we are so isolated. And it's a fragile planet. So I come back to what I said. It's a beautiful planet. It is small, it is isolated, and it is fragile. Because sometimes you see the scars that are left by human activity on the surface of the Earth. You see that. And
such as?
Well, typically deforestation and vegetation fires. I mean, that's something that is very striking from space. You don't see too much the air pollution. Typically, I remember passes over Mexico City, which is a city that has quite a lot of air pollution. And when we were passing just over Mexico City, we didn't see it at all, you know, because you see it from the top and vertically. Yeah. You don't realize that the air is polluted. You see it when you are on the ground and you look at the sun is somewhat obscured and you have kind of a haze, overall haze. You don't see this too much from space, but of course, the water pollution, something that you see typically when you have a big river like the Amazon River, when the mouth of the Amazon River and the Atlantic Ocean, there was a lot of brown color because of the erosion of and also material that had been deposited in the water. I mean, it was not pure water getting into the Atlantic Ocean; it was pretty dirty water. So the pollution of the water you see, of the air you don't see it. But what was the most striking in terms of fragility of planet Earth is the destruction of the vegetation by humans and the vegetation fires also.
Yeah, this sounds, I mean, as I said before, I can only imagine, but that's beautiful on the one hand and very sad to hear on the other hand.
In fact, the first sight, if you don't look too closely, it's beautiful. If you look more closely, you realize the damage that we do to planet Earth, and that was in the 90s. And of course, we have continued doing that in the last 20 years and more.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that we need to be really, really, really careful about planet Earth. And I know that now we have the awareness, at least. At that time, we had less awareness than we have now. You know,
but the question is, awareness is nice, but do we do something? That's the question. Action.
Well, but before you do something, you need to have the awareness. I would say that in the 80s and 90s, we had much less awareness about the global warming because it was not something that was too striking. I mean, it's mainly in the last 20 years that we have seen this rapid rise of the temperatures and all the violent atmospheric phenomena that accompany the global warming. Now, at least we have the awareness, and I'm monitoring the Earth from space, mainly from satellites, Earth observation satellites, and also from human spacecraft at the International Space Station. That helps us becoming much more aware and seeing where the problems are mainly. Yeah.
How do you deal with other people on the mission that you maybe do not like so much? Was there somebody, or no, I don't want to ask you if there was somebody in that case, but
no, I mean, again, we are so, I mentioned before, being obsessed with the idea of being successful on the mission. This binds people.
Yeah. So this you have that big picture, that big goal you're all focusing on.
Never had 4 missions, and each time we were 7 people on board. With a few of them several times. With one of them, Jeff Hoffman, an American astronaut, I flew 3 times. So 3 out of my 4 missions, I was with Jeff Hoffman, a wonderful individual and his very close friend. But basically, I never had any interpersonal problem with any of my fellow crew members. I mean, there are some that you are the closer friend with because, it's the chemistry of being maybe feeling closer to some of your colleagues than others, but there was never one with whom I had problems.
It's good. How do you think you could, not you in person, but like everyone, how could we bring this kind of, hey, we get along with each other, maybe also back on Earth in terms of colleagues or situations where...
Well, that's a good question. Of course, we had been selected, and in the selection, they were looking carefully that we did not have any aggressive trend for aggressive behavior.
Yeah.
And humility also is an important feature. Somebody who is dominant and who tries to show to all the others that he's better than the others. I mean, we never had that. And in the normal life here on Earth, we have this sometimes, and it's annoying. Of course, you can have somebody who is dominant, a man or a woman, but at the same time very talented. So it may be okay because he or she will be able to bring forward the flow of the mission towards success. But it can be a little difficult to stand that obnoxious character. But it never happened. We were all within a range of being friendly, being humble. And mutual respect and trust. I mean, I repeat myself a little bit, but I think it's important you understand these other features. Humility is very important, and you find this nearly always an astronaut. To a certain degree, there's always a certain band,
Yeah.
You have the extremely humble, and you have the little less humble, but you never have a major deviation from humility. That's important.
And I mean, you spend a lot of time together, right? Also in the training beforehand means you really get to know each other, don't you?
Yeah, we know each other. Yeah, we know each other very well. When I was talking about the trust within the crew, and you were talking about the passengers having the trust with the commandant pilot, of course, they normally have trust because, airline, they train their pilots to the degree that we minimize the likelihood of an accident. But of course, the commandant pilot don't know the passengers. Passengers don't know personally the commandant pilot. For us, we knew each other very, very well. Our strength and sometimes a little bit of weaknesses, never major weaknesses, but there may be some. And the idea is to respect also the area of specialization of your colleagues. If you have a fellow crew member working on doing a software load on the computer, and of course you let him do it, and because it's his or her responsibility, and only if he or she has problem with it, you politely suggest to help, but you never want to come and say, hey, I can do it better than you can. Never, obviously. So helping each other, but only in case it's really needed, and you do it very carefully because you don't want to impinge in the area of responsibility of your fellow crew members. You understand what I'm talking about here? So it requires some finesse, you want to handle things with...
What I like is that you said, I politely suggest something, not that I'm going to tell you what to do or I show you how it's done, but you politely suggest. And that's something I'm not sure if it's missing nowadays, maybe in society or...
And this is related to what I said before, the respect. And the respect of the person, but also the respect of the area of responsibility given to each of us.
Totally. I mean, I can only agree to that. What I also would love to know is once you're back on Earth again, I mean, there are only few people who understand what you've experienced, what you've done, how it is to be out there doing the spacewalk, all that stuff, working on the Hubble Telescope. So with whom are you going to talk and share something? Or is it more that you're like, yeah, I don't know, because whenever you want to share something, hardly anybody can understand what you experienced. Is it hard sometimes?
Well, I share it like I share with you. I think you understand pretty well. I mean, you take your time. If for the people for whom it is a completely foreign activity, then you explain a little more detail, you make drawings, and you show pictures. For me, I feel that it was such a privileged experience that I like to share it. Because when I was a kid, I had a lot of admiration for pilots and for astronauts. And when I had opportunity for a pilot to come to me and explain how an airplane is flying and operating, and how you fly an airplane and how you handle a problem with turbulence or crosswind at landing, I had passion that people explained to me. So I know, especially how kids they are thirsty for having explanation about how you handle such an unusual environment and the views of the sky and the earth. And I explained this slowly and with passion. I had passion for space, passion for astronomy, passion for airplanes also. And if you have passion, you're able to explain to people with quite a lot of a drive and color what is it to do such a unusual activity.
I like that you say have the passion and the drive. And I really feel, everybody can have a passion for whatever it is. Some say it's, I don't know, snakes. Okay, I don't like snakes, but if you love them and you can share about it, oh, I love how you tell me. Or when you say, hey, it's up in space. Okay, I know I'm not that good in physics, but I try to imagine, understand. So I love that everyone can have his or her passion and just I believe that everyone can bring in their puzzle piece, and if everyone is doing that worldwide, then it's just like a big puzzle and everyone can bring in whatever he or she can do. So we have the best pool of skills and experience, which helps everyone. So that's kind of my philosophy I like to think of. And yeah, sorry, go ahead.
But again, it was I insist on the fact that I feel very privileged I could do this.
I mean, how many people were in the how do you say, because one out of how many got chosen?
Well, there were about 600 people who went into space so far. Of course, many of them went several times. I went 4 times, and some astronaut went all the way to 7 times in space. But a little more than 600 individuals went into space so far. I think we went through the number 600 a few months ago. So we have a little more than 600 now. So it still is a relatively small fraction of the population of 8 billion, obviously. But it's increasing rapidly because now we have the so-called space tourists or the private astronauts who are not...
Do you think it's really coming?
It's coming, yeah. Several of them flew last year. There was even a flight, so-called Inspiration 4 flight in a Crew Dragon of SpaceX. There were 4 crew members, and the 4 of them were tourists or private astronauts. Of course, they had quite a lot of training. One of them was designated as a commander, Jared Isaacman. He's an American businessman, but he flies airplane, and he's a good man and has good leadership also. And he was able to command that mission, and he had invited the other crew members to fly with him, and they were trained. And it was a wonderful mission. It was a relatively simple mission. They flew for 3 days without docking to the International Space Station. So it was kind of a free flight. But still, and a lot of the phases were automatic also, but still they had to monitor and be able to take over manually in case the automatic system had not worked. So space tourism is rising rapidly and more. If you look at the so-called manifest, the plan of the missions for the next few months and years, there's a good fraction of them that have private astronauts on board.
Okay.
And some of them have only private astronauts, as I mentioned. There was the first one last year, but it will continue.
But what do I do when you say they're up in space for 3 days? Okay, are they just keeping orbiting, or?
Well, they always plan to do some experiments or take a lot of photography, and
Okay, so also the tourist part.
They don't want to go and not plan to do something reasonable. Of course, they're probably less busy than we were on missions like a Hubble Space Telescope repair mission. That's obvious. And so far, there have been no spacewalk done by private astronauts, but there will be one in this summer. It's going to be a so-called Polaris mission, again with a Crew Dragon, again with Jared Isaacman, this American. He's the one who will do the first private spacewalk.
It's so interesting. I mean, that's something really Big, and still I bet that hardly anybody has heard of him. It's interesting.
Yeah, well, yeah, you'll hear about it when it happened. It's
Probably.
Polaris Dawn mission. I think that's the name of the mission, on board the Crew Dragon, the SpaceX Crew Dragon, and Jared Isaacman plus plus 3 people. There will be 4 total. That's the number of people that can go on a mission of the Crew Dragon, which is a SpaceX vehicle on top of the Falcon 9 rocket, which is also SpaceX rocket.
Yeah.
And this was all developed to satisfy the needs of NASA. NASA wanted, after the shuttle was retired, a way to take astronauts, whether private or space agency astronaut. But NASA handles only the NASA astronaut. When it's a private mission, then it's handled by SpaceX directly. But anyway, NASA wanted to have a way to bring astronauts to the station, which the shuttle did often until 2011. Then it was retired. And a couple of years ago, we had the first Crew Dragon with a Falcon, the Falcon 9 rocket with a Crew Dragon capsule that took Americans to the International Space Station. And again, it's either agency astronauts, and not only Americans, but also Europeans and Canadian and Japanese, and even sometimes Russian come on board the Crew Dragon. And that's a system that has been developed the last few years and works quite well. But it's a private company that designed and operates the Falcon 9 of the Crew Dragon, which is something new. Before, spaceflight was done only through space agencies, but now you have private companies doing it as well.
Interesting. Okay, you see, I should follow up on this, because I heard on the of the start of the space tourism, but then I don't know, it got lost. But it's very interesting.
You have your chance. You can go. It's not very inexpensive, I have to say.
I mean, I do not enjoy being on a plane, right? So maybe the rocket is not the best way of tourism for me.
But I think that the main thing is the opportunity is there for people who are non-astronaut to go into space. And I think that's wonderful.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Well, thank you. We could go on for hours and hours, and I really appreciate your time, because I know you're extremely busy, and I know that you have had so great experiences, and I'm very thankful that you shared them with us. So thank you so much for your time and the insights.
You're welcome. Again, it's a pleasure to share. It's such a deep experience that you need to share it. You cannot keep it for yourself.
Totally. So that's why. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Wir hören uns nächsten Montag wieder. Bis dahin wünsche ich dir eine schöne Woche und vor allem denk dran, Stress ist kein Statussymbol.